If you haven't done your first mix yet, if you're just getting started mixing, if you consistently hit walls and get stuck while mixing or get overwhelmed, we're going to show you in this video how to go from this
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds, pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life.
to this.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds, pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life.
Hey yo, it's Alex from Mind Music, and with this channel, it's my mission to help musicians produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. And in this video, we're going to continue from the last video where we talked about the philosophy of mixing, the mindset of mixing, and kind of what you need to know before you really start diving into the nitty-gritty details of getting a mix done. So if you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to check that out first. I'll link it in the card above, so you have the right mindset, the right headspace, and you understand the tools at your disposal before we jump into the framework. But with this video, we're gonna go on a game plan on how to approach the mix from beginning to end with a simple to follow framework. And the power of a workflow or a framework or a blueprint, whatever you wanna call it, a process, is that it will allow you to stay on track and stay in flow state instead of getting lost in the details. And all too often, I do this over and over. It still happens to me. You find yourself at rock bottom, mindlessly adjusting faders, not really knowing where you're going or what, if it sounds better or if it just sounds different, and it gets kind of messy. But not for you, not today. So let's quickly go over the roadmap, and then we'll dive into each step a little bit deeper. All right, so step 1 is organize your session. Step 2 is set up your routing. Step 3 is balance the levels. Step 4 is process your tracks. Step 5, automation. Step 6, add any special effects. And then step 7 is finalize. All right, and it's not super important that you follow this exact workflow so long as you have a workflow. Because if you set up a process that you use every time that you mix, you'll mix not only faster, but far better. And having a repeatable, predictable, familiar workflow will allow you to stay engaged with the right side creative part of your brain by taking care of the tedious technical tasks ahead of time. It will help you stay in this state a lot easier. All right, let's talk about step 1, organize your session. And this is actually super important before you focus on the mix down, especially if you're mixing your own music, because it's super easy to fall back into arrangement, back into editing, back into maybe changing things of your song and losing focus of your one goal, which should be mixing. So a great way to think about this is pretend that you were sending your song to another mixing engineer for them to mix. And if you were going to do that, you'd want all of your files to be organized and they would all have to be bounced down to audio. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if you have any software instruments that are being triggered by MIDI, you're going to have to bounce that down to audio to have an audio file with all of the sound built into that file instead of relying on the software instrument, because the mixing engineer might not have the same software instrument or the same settings that you do for the MIDI file. So that's one thing that you kind of want to keep in mind as you organize your session. Now, if you look at my session, I didn't bounce down all of my MIDI because I'm mixing it myself, and I have a computer that's strong enough, that's powerful enough to trigger the MIDI in real time without any delay. So I'm not taking my own advice here. All right, so the first thing you want to do is to order all of your tracks on the screen. So if we look at this track here, I have in red, I have all of my bass sounds, all of my sounds that occupy the low end frequencies. And then I have a track for my drums. And then I have a percussion sample. And then I have a couple tracks for the main melody of the song. And then if I open up this group, I have all of these different effects that are scattered throughout the song on different tracks. And then I have the vocals way at the bottom here. And the power of this is that it keeps your tracks organized and makes it very easy for you to navigate the session, right? Because if I want to jump to my bass sounds, I know exactly where they are. If I need to go to the vocals, I know where they are. And it's become second nature over time. I also encourage you to color code your tracks so that it becomes familiar to you. You don't have to use what I use, but I use red for bass, I use orange for drums, yellow for percussion, and then any kind of melodic instrument, harmonic instrument goes green, sometimes blue, and then my effects usually purples, blacks, and then vocals in this weird pink fusion color. And I try to stick to something similar so that at a glance, I know where everything is in my session. So on top of organizing your tracks and color coding them, you want to make sure that they are named something significant to the track so that you can easily identify what it is, because there's no worse feeling than being confused in your own session, not knowing what this track is or what sound it is. And it just helps you stay on top of your workflow if you know where everything is and you understand what it's named. Another part of organizing your session is that you're going to want to group similar tracks into groups to lower your total track count. This will just make it easier for you to navigate your session again, but it will also help you because you can control the volume of several tracks with one volume fader, and you can also process several tracks at the same time. So for example, I have my 3 bass sounds here. I haven't grouped it yet, but I could simply select them all, right click, and then group tracks, and then rename the group to, let's say, bass. So one of the powerful things of grouping similar tracks together is that you could control the volume of multiple tracks with one fader, and you can also process all of these tracks at the same time by throwing a plugin on the group. So next you can start to think about return tracks. And return tracks are basically tracks where you would typically put an effect of some sort, and then you will send a certain amount of whatever track you want to affect to that track. So if I pop up these return tracks, I have a few of them here. I have a compressor, I have a reverb, delay, I have this crazy tornado plugin, I have a slapback delay for the vocals, I have a long vocal verb, vocal delay, all this kind of stuff. And what you can do is, for example, so let's say I want to send part of this sound to a delay. I'll just switch views to session view, and then I could change the amount of whatever send I want. I have 7 sends here that correspond to these 7 sends on my mixer. So let's say I want to send this to this long vocal reverb here. Simply, I would just turn up the F send, and it will send part of this track to this return track where there is a vocal verb loaded. So let's play it. So now I'm sending it to the reverb, and that's without it. And you might be asking yourself, like, what's the point of creating return tracks if you could just put a reverb directly on the track that you want, or put effects directly on the track that you're working with? And the advantage of using a return track is that you can actually process your effects differently than you do the original track. So you could EQ your delay, you could EQ your reverb separately from the original source track. Another advantage to this is that you can also save a lot of CPU space by using return tracks and sending multiple tracks to that effect instead of loading that effect on every single track. You can save a lot of CPU space that way. All right, so step 2 is setting up your routing. And we've actually already started that process by setting up our groups, which can be also called our mix buses. All right, so typically you'll have a bus for your bass, a bus for your drums, a bus for your melodies, your guitars, your pianos, your vocals, whatever it may be, so that you can control them together and you can process them all together, which just significantly makes your workflow so much easier. All right, so once you've set up all of your groups and all of your tracks are organized, you can go ahead and set up your auxiliary returns. And as we talked about, an auxiliary return track enables you to affect multiple tracks without putting effects directly on your track. So I have a few typical return tracks that I set up every time I do a mix. So first and foremost, I have a parallel compression return track where I've put a really intense compressor on, where I usually send the snare and sometimes some of the kick and sometimes a few other things to just get crushed. And then I mix it in at a lower level to just get that extra snap, that extra attack. Next, I have a snare reverb where I only send all of my snare samples or the snare of your drum kit to this reverb to just add a little bit of space to get a little bit of a reverb tail behind that snare, add a little bit of thickness. So my third return track is a delay, and sometimes I will automate the send of whatever track I want to go through the delay at specific points in the song to just add an echo, to add a little bit of space, but I might not have it on all the time. And my fourth return track is Tornado, which is kind of this like experimental multi-effect plugin. And all I've done is automate certain tracks to go to this effect at certain points in the song. So you can hear it here. That weird modulated delay sound is the Tornado return track. There's another one here.
On the world circus of Saturn.
That like time stretch, and then when it comes back up here. That's all coming from Tornado. Next, I have a slapback, which is basically a super short delay that I've added to the vocals to just thicken it up and add some width to the main vocals. And then I also have a long vocal reverb for specific words that I need extra reverb on. And same goes for the vocal delay. I have a specific vocal delay that sometimes I'll throw a specific word to get an echo.
Keep in mind.
Right, so for that specific vocal part, I sent it to that vocal delay return track just to add a little bit of movement. All right, and I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty detail of all of my return tracks and what I've done in this song and all of the plugins. I'm just giving you a simple framework that you can use to follow along to finish your own mix. All right, so once you experiment with setting up some return tracks, maybe you find some that you go to all the time. Maybe there's certain effects that you like to use on most of your tracks. Once you have that figured out, you can actually save your return tracks as a template. And then every time you start a new mix, you'll have these return tracks loaded up, ready to go, which makes it a huge time saver. All right, so next step is step 3, which is balance your levels. And with all of that technical routing and all of your return tracks and all of your organization, grouping your tracks out of the way. All right, so I would suggest that you bring all of your faders down and then you start fresh and you bring your faders up one by one to get a quick level balance and panning of all your tracks, and listen through the song a few times and then just do some more balancing as you go. And then as you're doing this, I would also recommend that before you start actually mixing, you'd want to tune your ears towards a sound that you might be going after, such as a reference track or some track that you really like the mix of, and you want to tune your ears towards what a professional sounding mix sounds like and try to keep that perspective as you start mixing your track. All right, so as you're going through the song and making these level adjustments and these panning adjustments, try to take note of any unique parts or any parts that need to be emphasized to really enhance the energy and the character of the song. I've already balanced a lot of this stuff because I've finished this mix already, but a good place to start is somewhere around -10 decibels and try to balance your tracks according to each other from that starting point. It's a great starting point. And keep in mind that like an adjustment of 1, 2, 3 dBs can be plenty, can make a huge difference. So do not underestimate the power of subtle moves. Sub. All right, so the drums and bass are sounding pretty balanced. Again, I've already done this, but I would encourage you to play around with the faders, maybe play around with the panning of the different elements and make sure that your drum and bass are sounding really good together. And then let's move on to add some melody here. Let's go to when the bass and drums are playing at the same time. Pretty twisted sounding, no doubt. Okay, let's move on to this piano sample. So again, you're just bringing in one track at a time and balancing it with what you've already established. So here's this piano sample. Probably the main motif of the song. And I have some of these effects that are still coming through. Kind of this like creepy dissonant thing going around your head. So that's what this effect is doing. Right, and this is kind of like a trumpet panning left to right. Right, so let's listen to this all together. So you get the gist. You want to kind of bring one track back in at a time and balance it with everything else that's going on. You might have to adjust the pan or the volume slightly as you bring in new tracks. And then let's go to the vocals.
As a clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds. Pay close attention to the lies. Believe in your rights, fight for your life. Keep your chin up towards the sky. Reach over mountains, rise and fly. No need to hide.
So the vocals are pretty loud, but the vocals are the main feature of the song, 100%. I would encourage you to take the time and go through every single track, every tiny effect, every little thing, and make sure that it is in balance volume-wise and panning with everything else in your song, and you're off to a great start. Now we can move on to step 4, which is process your track. And at this step is when we can whip out our fancy tools such as EQ, compression, saturation, or anything else that will get the job done. And I would encourage you to wait until you get an awesome balance, maybe listen to the song a couple times through before jumping into processing things. So as you adjusted the levels and the panning through maybe 2, 3, 4 listens, you'll probably have noted a few things that need to be fixed. So I would encourage you to focus on those things that you noticed first. Maybe it's your low end is too muddy. Maybe your snare isn't cutting through enough. Maybe I don't know, that there's some masking going on between several layers. Whatever it may be, I would suggest that you start there. And usually, not all the time, but usually it's a good idea to move in the order that the tracks are organized. So for example, drums first, then your bass, then your guitars, then your pianos, then your samples, whatever it may be, in that order. And as you move your tracks, keep in mind that any adjustment you make to any track moving forward, you might have to go back and adjust what you've already tweaked, because any change you make in a mix will affect everything in the mix. All right? So that's something you definitely want to keep in mind. Don't think that it's just one thing that you adjust and you set it and forget it. It's a moving thing that you have to go back and check how things sound after you make a move. So this means as you progress, you should be listening to how your bass adjustments are affecting your drum sounds, for example. And you'll be jumping back and forth, making adjustments on things you've already worked on, like I said. All right, another pro tip is you want to use the solo button. So basically isolating one element by hitting S, and then you're only hearing that one track. You want to use this feature very sparingly when you're mixing, because it is so easy to get lost in adjusting something out of context of everything else, and you might make something sound really good by itself, but then as soon as you bring in the other tracks, it doesn't sound like it should, right? Something's off. It's because you were mixing it in solo. And it's super useful for zeroing in on maybe a specific issue on that track, but in general, you don't want to be mixing in solo. Because on the flip side, sometimes things might not sound great in solo, but as soon as you pop everything else in, poof, everything sounds amazing. All right, so once you have the basic tonal character of all of your tracks working well together, then you can start adding effects, delays, reverbs to help you stay creative, help you stay engaged, and then move on to the final steps. So again, I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of every single plugin and every move I've done on this mix. I'm just going to go over maybe a few main features that I've done so you can get some ideas. All right, so I'm just going to give you a few quick examples of some of the processing I did across some of these tracks. So let's solo these drums. And yes, that sample is part of the drums. So all I have going on these drums is an EQ, some saturation, and a compressor. So if I turn off all of this processing, that's what it sounds like. Let's bring up the EQ. Off. On. So I boosted the low end a little bit. I boosted a lot of 8K. I'm gonna remove some honkiness here. Then I added some tape saturation, which brings out a little bit of warmth. Turn it off. On. And then finally a compressor. Right, the compressor just kind of tightens up the low end, kind of acts like a glue between all the high frequencies, because there's a lot going on in this drum kit, a lot of different sounds. So the compressor just helps glue it all together. So that's what I got going on for the drums. Let's move on to the bass. And for the sub bass here, I have quite a few things stacked. So yeah, that's what I've got. I got max bass on, which is enhancing the low end. I've got a limiter that's just shaving off any peaks and really pinning it in place. And then I have an EQ where I'm removing a ton of one frequency that was jumping out to me, and I'm boosting a little bit of low end. So I'll take these off so you can hear the difference. This is with nothing. Okay, max bass on. Picks up that really low end, probably like 80 to 150 hertz. Turn on the limiter. Compresses it and just pins it right in the middle. And then the EQ. Just to make that low end really pop out. And there's this one frequency I took out. Kind of like boxy, so I took this out. That's what I got going on for that bass. And then for a lot of these effects, these samples, these like loops that are going on, I've basically just used some EQ on most of them. Sometimes I threw on some compression, and I took out all the frequencies that aren't required. So in this like piano loop, for example, if we play this, I took out a bunch of low end because we don't need any low end. We got the bass. Notice how much more low end there is when I take off the EQ. If I turn it on, it's subtle, but it takes away some of that low end and enhances some of the high end. Then I added some saturation to just make it spark a little bit more. And I compressed it just so it could stick out, because this is pretty much the main the approach I took for most of these effects, right? You just listen to what character of the sound you really want to emphasize and what frequencies are not useful. Like what frequencies can you completely eliminate with an EQ or something to give more room to the other elements that are in that space, such as the drums, the bass, or some of these effects have a lot of low end as well. So you really have to be careful, especially managing your low end and making sure that every sound has a space that it can sit in. And then finally for the vocals, I just took kind of a blanket approach and I processed a lot of the vocals in the same way. So I'll quickly go through this chain.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds, pay close attention to the light.
So I've got quite a few things going on here. I'll turn everything off so you can hear what the raw vocals sound like.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds, pay close attention to the lies.
So if I turn the first one on, I have an EQ, taking out everything under 100 hertz or so. We're boosting at 8K, we're boosting at 4.5K, we're boosting a little bit more here, and I'm taking out a little bit of low end. So I'll A/B this.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds, pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life.
So it brings out a lot of that high end sizzle, right? It really makes it stick out. Without the EQ, it's kind of muddy, it's kind of like unclear. So that's super powerful. Took out some of the low end. Next is I have a compressor going on, so I'll A/B this.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds, pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life.
So notice that when you turn on the compressor, every syllable that he is saying has impact, okay? Every single word has impact, and that's getting the right setting with your compressor. It really has impact to the vocals. It makes it hit harder. So I'll A/B this again for you without it.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds, pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life, keep your chin up towards the sky.
So notice how the compressor really makes the syllables stick out, really makes them jump out at you. So that's a huge move to make your vocals stand out on top of your mix. Next, I have a de-esser to take out some of the S's, because a lot of the times with vocals, the S's, sometimes the P's, the B's will be harsh. So I found some of the S's to be a little harsh, so we'll A/B this.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds.
That's without it, with it on.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds.
Just makes the S's stick out a little bit less, smooths them out a little bit. Next, I have a limiter. So with all this processing, I just wanted to make sure that we pin the vocals into place so there's less dynamics, because we want the vocals to be front and center for the whole song, and it's basically the main attraction of the song. So I'll A/B this.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds. Pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life. Keep your chin up towards the sky.
So it is doing quite a bit of gain reduction, but I do like the sound of this limiter. Like, it's not only to limit the sound, it's also to color it. So I really do like the sound of the L1. Next I have the CLA mixdown, which I've been experimenting with. And this is just basically an EQ / compressor that's built for vocals. So let's A/B this.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds. Pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life. Keep your chin up.
So it's basically just calming down the high end because it's a little bit sizzly after we limited it. And then it's really compressing it down to just pin it into place a little bit more. Next I have Ozone Nectar 3, which I use just for some texture and some color. So I added a little bit of space, a little bit of tone to this, so we'll A/B it.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds. Pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life. Keep your chin up towards the sky, reach.
So this plugin is really just emphasizing the vocals, making it sound like extraordinary, making it sound over and above, a little bit of extra sizzle. So I really like that one. And then finally, I have this denoiser, because sometimes after you do a lot of processing, it can pick up a lot of noise. So I do this just to calm down any crazy harmonics that might have been generated from what we've put on. So I'll A/B this.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds. Pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life. Keep your chin up towards the sky, reach.
So it really just kind of smooths out any harshness that you might find after we did all of that processing. All right, so I'll A/B the whole chain with the whole mix. So, okay, this is with the chain off.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds. Pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life. Keep your chin up towards the sky, reach over mountains, rise and fly. No need to hide or feel the need to disguise, but always keep in mind.
Pretty big difference. All right, let's move on to step 5, which is automation. And unfortunately, this step is often skipped by a lot of people. And it's unfortunate because automation is a really powerful tool that allows you to breathe life into your mix. Automation is basically when you program automatic changes to happen to a specific parameter of a track over time. One of the most common automations you'll see is just a simple volume automation. And it doesn't take much automation to make a huge difference. A lot of subtle moves add up to something great, right? A great example of automation is increasing the volume by 1 or 2 dB for the chorus and then decreasing the volume for the verses just to add a little bit more explosion for those choruses. And I cannot say this enough. Automation is one of the most important tools in mixing. The more time you focus on automating subtle changes and catching the listener's ear, the more engaging and exciting you're going to make the final product. And typically, this is what will separate a pro mixdown from maybe a more amateur mixdown, is how much time you spend in automation, in automating things to really generate some movement. And automation, of course, on top of all that, is an insanely powerful creative tool. So you might be automating effects, you might be automating filters or parameters of your synths or whatever it may be in real time as you're creating things, so you can actually build up musical ideas and parts with automation in mind, but you can also use it for anything under the sun. And that's the power of the modern digital production age, is you can pretty much automate anything. If there's a knob, if there's a fader, if there's a switch, most likely you can automate that and you can play with it to your heart's content. All right, so I'm gonna just go ahead and play the verse here, and I'll pick out a few automations that I did throughout this verse and chorus, and then we'll move on to the next step.
Step into my shoes, organize the clues, heal these scars from underneath the wounds. Pay close attention to the lies, believe in your rights, fight for your life. Keep your chin up towards.
So the first thing that sticks out is the synths. I automated, if I go into automation mode here, I automated the pan of this track to kind of circle around your head. So let me solo this so you can hear it. So notice how it automatically pans from left to right, and that's because I've automated the panning of this track to move according to these lines that I drew in. So if we zoom in, this automation is representing the right and left side, and I just created a graph for it to move right to left. All right, so let's continue. Like I mentioned before, between the verse and the chorus, I did a slight volume automation of the whole master track. So if I go back into automation mode, click on the volume, you can see that for these choruses, the volume is going up like 2 dB, barely anything, but just to add a little bit more energy to the whole song.
Resides within shame, lost in the grave of temptation. It's raining corpses of burning fallen angels amidst of hatred. Constantly vastly changes, heartless underworld of faces.
All right, and sky is the limit with automation. I can't say that enough. I just barely scratched the surface with what's possible with automation. So I encourage you to explore automation. So maybe automate the volume of various tracks, maybe play around with automating some filters or some of your effects, play around with automating some of the sends of your tracks to your returns. That's a really fun technique to get some cool effects. And speaking of effects, let's move to step 6, which is effects. So once you've completed your automation moves, take some time to listen for any opportunities to add some extra effects or special effects to your song. So this could be something as simple as a filter sweep or a bass drop, or it could be something more crazy and experimental. The key is that it serves the song and it doesn't take away from the core experience of your track. And if you're an experimental artist in general, you might have created these crazy effects, done some crazy sound design, playing with synths as you're composing your tracks. You might have done a lot of this already. All right, so let me show you maybe a couple effects I have going on here. So right at the intro of this song, we actually added some crow samples, and I put a delay on one of the crows. So it's almost like you're walking up to like a dead corpse or something, and then you startled all these crows and they just all fly away in a flock. So I'll show you that. Right, but right at the drop, it really adds some impact. So another example of effects for this track is samples. I used a ton of samples as ambiances and drones and extra effects instead of just adding effects to the sounds I was using. I just found really cool textures that worked with the song. So right here, I have this ambience that comes in twice. So let me show you that. Very simple, but it adds a lot. Towards the end of the first chorus here, I have this vocal that's like a scream. So let me solo this.
Faces!
And I added a delay on that scream. But before the scream comes in, I also added this kind of like swell that goes towards, that builds up towards that scream. And it really adds a significant effect, a statement for the end of the chorus. So this is what the swell up sounds like. And both of them together.
Faces!
Right, and then context with the whole chorus.
Underworld of faces. Purposely drowning myself.
Right, and then the echo kind of reverberates into the second verse. So again, effects is just little tiny things can make a huge difference when you take the time to pepper them throughout your track. All right, and let's move on to the final step of the framework, which is step 7, finalize. And the final step is to listen, make any final tweaks, and commit to call it finished for now. So while you're listening back, try to remove yourself from the driver's seat and try to listen to your mix as if you were a fan. So I suggest that you set the mood, maybe turn down the lights, turn off your screens and listen to the track from start to finish and just do not stop the playback. Okay, get like a pad or something and make notes of anything you notice that you have to change, but do not interrupt playback. This is super important because you're trying to listen to the song as a whole. You're trying to zoom out from all the details and see the bigger picture of the song. So you want to listen to the song as one whole thing, make some notes on what you want to change. And while you're listening to this track, you want to ask yourself, how does everything feel together? Does it flow well? Does it captivate you for its entirety? Does it make you bob your head? These are the qualities you're kind of looking for an awesome sounding mix. All right, so once you've listened to your mix a few times, you're gonna maybe want to fix some of the issues you've noticed. But once you've done that, I highly suggest that you stop, that you export the song, and then you start listening to it in different speaker systems. So you might listen to it on your phone, you might listen to it through headphones, you might listen to it through your monitors, maybe you have a Bluetooth speaker, maybe you can pop it in your car and listen to it in your car. So as you're listening to your mix on a bunch of different speaker systems, you want to make notes as to any tweaks that you have to do for any discrepancies. So for example, maybe you were mixing in your studio, but then you popped it in your car and there's way too much bass, you can't hear the kick drum. Well, then you would make a note of that. Or maybe in headphones, the high end was muddy, right? So listening to your mix in different speakers will give you different perspectives of your mix, and that will give you a better perspective on doing the final tweaks. All right, so once you've listened to your mix on a bunch of different speakers and you have a bunch of tweaks that you've noted down that you have to do, I highly suggest that you sleep on it. All right, because if you've been mixing one song for a long time and listening to a bunch of different speaker systems and like been tweaking EQs for hours, your ears are going to be tired. So I highly suggest that you sleep on it, and then the next day you're going to have a way better perspective and fresh ears to finalize your track. So once you're ready to finish off your track, I'd suggest that you just give it another listen through, maybe make any notes on any tweaks you want to do, and then go ahead and do your final tweaks before finalizing your mix. And if you're just getting started, this can be a process. It can take time to get a mix at the place it needs to be. It might take several sessions. It might take you a few days, and that's totally fine. And some mixes are harder than others. Sometimes a mix comes together really quick, and sometimes it's a little bit more work and a little bit more tedious. All right, but if you follow this framework and you really pay special attention to completing each of these steps, I guarantee you that you will be able to mix your songs with confidence and that you're going to get a good end result. And hey, if you're just getting started with music production or having trouble finishing projects or just want to get a deeper glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that helps you go from your very first ideas all the way to your finished mix and your finished master. And it's super handy to have around the studio as a printout. So if you're interested in grabbing that, you can grab it below. And hey, let me know, is this the first time that you'll be mixing your own music, or have you been doing this for a while? And if you have mixed your own music before, what does your framework look like? Does it look similar to mine? Is there a step that I have that you don't? Is there something I missed? I'd love to know more below. So leave a comment down below and let's start a conversation. And until the next video, we'll see you later.